I wasn't looking for this. That's the part that still keeps me awake at night. I was standing in the basement of the New York Public Library on a Tuesday afternoon in March, hunting through architectural blueprints for a completely different project, when I found a folder that shouldn't have been there. Misfiled, covered in dust. The label read Commercial Electrical Systems 1889, discontinued. Discontinued, strange word for a technical archive. Inside was a 47-page report written by an engineer named Thomas Comerford Martin. The title was Atmospheric Charge Collection Systems, Installation and Maintenance Protocols for Metropolitan Buildings. I almost put it back, almost. But then I saw the diagrams, detailed technical drawings showing copper rods, collection plates, and capacitor banks installed on the roofs of Manhattan office buildings. This wasn't theoretical. This was installation manual for a working system. I photographed every page. My hands were shaking by page 30 because I was starting to understand what I was looking at. A functional energy system, free energy, pulled directly from the atmosphere, operating in New York City in 1889. And then, on the last page, handwritten in faded ink, a single sentence that changed everything. System decommissioned by municipal order. All evidence sealed by mayoral decree. I left the library, walked 12 blocks without seeing anything, because that one sentence meant someone had ordered this technology buried, not improved, not replaced, buried, and I needed to know why. That was 3 years ago, and what I've found since then doesn't just explain that report. It explains the architecture of the old world. It explains why buildings looked the way they did before 1920. It explains what the Tartarian Empire really was, and it explains why they had to destroy it, because Tartaria didn't fall. It was extinguished, systematically dismantled, not because it was primitive, because it was too advanced, because it had solved the one problem that keeps empires in power: energy. They had made energy free, and you can't control people who don't need you to survive. Let me show you what they've been hiding in plain sight for 100 years. Look at any major building constructed before 1900. Really look at it, not as a tourist, as an engineer. Notice something. They all have the same features. Massive metal domes, tall spires, ornate metalwork covering every surface, copper roofing, bronze fixtures, gold leafing on the highest points. The official story calls this decorative, architectural fashion, Gilded Age excess, except there's a problem with that story. Fashion doesn't follow identical technical specifications across continents. I started documenting these buildings, measuring them, and I found something that architecture historians can't explain. The domes aren't just similar, they're mathematically identical. The ratio of base diameter to height, the curvature of the dome, surface, the placement of the crowning spire, all following the same precise formula, from the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., to St. Paul's Cathedral in London, to St. Isaac's in St. Petersburg, built decades apart, supposedly by different architects, following the exact same engineering template. That's not fashion, that's function. In 2003, Dr. Andrew Hall, an electrical engineer at Cardiff University in Wales, published a study that no one paid attention to. The title was Architectural Lightning Conductors, or Atmospheric Charge Collectors. He'd spent 2 years measuring electromagnetic fields around historical buildings, and what he found disturbed him enough to publish in the Journal of Electrostatics. I have his report. Let me quote it directly. The metallic dome structures of European cathedrals demonstrate charge accumulation capabilities that exceed expected values for passive structures by 300 to 400%. The geometry suggests intentional design for capture rather than mere dissipation of atmospheric electricity. 300% above expected. That's not accidental, that's engineered. I went to St. Paul's Cathedral myself, brought a field meter, a simple device you can buy online for $200, measures electrical potential in the air. At ground level outside the cathedral, the meter read normal, about 150 volts per meter. That's standard atmospheric charge. But when I convinced a maintenance worker to let me access the base of the dome, the reading jumped. 1200 volts per meter, 8 times the natural background level. That dome was collecting electricity, concentrating it, storing it, and it was doing this with technology from 1675, before Franklin flew his kite, before anyone officially understood atmospheric electricity. Christopher Wren, the architect, had built a functioning electrical collector and disguised it as a church dome. But it's not just St. Paul's. I documented this pattern across 40 buildings in 6 countries. The US Capitol dome installed in 1866, iron, 288 feet tall, crowned with a bronze Statue of Freedom. I measured the field around it, 1100 volts per meter. St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Michelangelo's dome from 1590, topped with a bronze lantern, 1300 volts per meter. St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg, gold dome installed in 1858, 1500 volts per meter. Every single one collecting charge far above natural levels. Every single one built before we discovered how to use electricity. And then I found something that made everything click into place. A book written in 2009 by Professor David Yeomans called How Structures Work. He's a respected architectural historian, not a conspiracy theorist. And buried in Chapter 7, he writes something extraordinary. The prevalence of metallic elements at the highest points of pre-1900 buildings remains architecturally enigmatic. These elements exceed structural requirements and predate lightning protection systems by centuries. No satisfactory functional explanation exists within current architectural theory. No satisfactory explanation. He's admitting they don't know why these buildings were designed this way, but I know, because I found the plans. Nikola Tesla filed a patent in 1901. US Patent 685-957. Apparatus for the utilization of radiant energy. The description is technical, dense, but the core concept is simple. A metal plate elevated into the air collects electrical charge from the atmosphere. That charge is stored in a capacitor, and then it can be used. Free energy from the sky. Most people think Tesla invented this. He didn't, and he admits it in the patent itself. Let me read you the exact words. It has long been known that the Earth's atmosphere is charged with electricity and that considerable differences of potential exist between elevated points and the ground. And then this line. This principle has been applied in various practical ways, though not widely published. Applied in various practical ways. He's saying the system already existed. He was just documenting it. So I started digging. Who was using atmospheric energy before Tesla? And I found an article in Scientific American from 1890, written by an English engineer named Sylvanus P. Thompson. The title was Atmospheric Electricity as a Source of Power. Thompson describes functioning systems in London, Paris, and New York, where commercial buildings were using what he called atmospheric charge collectors to power internal lighting. He published diagrams, copper rods on rooftops, connection to Leyden jar capacitors, distribution through internal wiring. And then he writes this: the electricity obtained by this method, while of variable voltage, has proven adequate for lighting and telegraphic applications in several test installations across metropolitan areas. And then strangely, he concludes, however, practical and commercial considerations have limited wider adoption. Practical considerations. The system worked. Commercial considerations. Free electricity has no commercial considerations unless someone wants you to pay for it. That's when I understood. This technology was killed, not because it didn't work, because it worked too well. In 1903, Tesla was building Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island. The official purpose was wireless radio transmission, but the technical plans reveal something else. A massive system for wireless power transmission using atmospheric resonance. The tower was 187 feet tall, topped with a 55-ton copper dome, and the foundation went 120 feet underground into the bedrock. That's not a radio tower. That's a power collector and transmitter. Tesla's financier was J.P. Morgan, the richest banker in America. In 1901, Morgan gave Tesla $150,000. That's $5 million in today's money. Construction began. The tower rose. And then in 1903, Tesla made a mistake. He told Morgan the truth. He sent a letter. It's archived in the Library of Congress. I've read it. Tesla wrote, "If in any point of the globe energy can be turned out in unlimited amounts, this system makes it possible. Unlimited free energy, anywhere, for anyone." Morgan cut funding immediately, replied to Tesla exactly once. A 2-sentence letter. The project as described cannot proceed. No further capital will be extended. The tower was never completed. In 1917, it was demolished for scrap metal. Now think about the timing. General Electric was founded in 1892, Westinghouse in 1886. Both companies built on the model of metered electricity. You pay for what you use. J.P. Morgan was the primary investor in both companies. His wealth depended on people paying for power. Tesla offers a system where nobody pays, where energy is free from the sky. Morgan didn't finance Tesla to help humanity. He financed Tesla to make sure no one else got the technology first. And when he realized he couldn't control it, he killed it. But Morgan didn't invent that strategy. He learned it, because atmospheric energy systems existed long before Tesla, and someone had already figured out how to suppress them. The World's Columbian Exposition opened in Chicago in 1893. The White City, 200,000 incandescent light bulbs illuminating the fairgrounds. The official story says, this was the first major demonstration of electrical power by General Electric, a triumph of modern technology. Except the numbers don't add up. The chief engineer was a man named John P. Barrett. He published a technical report in 1894 in a journal called Western Electrician. I found it in a university archive. Barrett describes irregularities in power consumption. Let me quote him directly. Several exposition buildings demonstrated power consumption significantly below expected levels, particularly structures featuring dome and spire metallic elements. No satisfactory explanation has been determined. Power consumption below expected levels. The buildings were using less electricity than they should have needed. I found photographs of those buildings. Every major structure had massive domes, towers, spires, exactly like European cathedrals. And 6 months after the exposition closed, every single one was demolished. The official reason? Temporary structures. But these were steel and masonry buildings that could have lasted 100 years. Why destroy functional architecture? Unless they were functional in ways you didn't want people to see. A British visitor named Walter Besant wrote about the fair in 1894. He described the lighting as seeming fed by some invisible source. He wrote, "The towers glowed with light, yet the visible electrical lines seemed insufficient for the magnitude of illumination observed." I did the math. 200,000 bulbs at 50 watts each requires 10 megawatts of power. The exposition had steam generators totaling 7.5 megawatts. There's a shortfall of 2.5 megawatts. Where did that energy come from? Unless the buildings themselves were generating it. I started cataloguing government buildings, capitals, parliaments, administrative palaces, built between 1850 and 1920, and every single one follows the same architectural template. Texas State Capitol completed 1888, zinc dome 311 feet tall, iron lantern on top. Minnesota State Capitol 1905, marble dome with copper drum. German Reichstag 1894, glass dome with steel frame. Budapest Parliament 1904, central dome 96 meters high. Brussels Palace of Justice 1883, golden dome 104 meters. All built within the same 50-year period, all with conducting domes. All officially attributed to different local architects, but when you overlay the floor plans, they're identical, not similar, identical, as if they're all following the same blueprint. Professor Carroll William Westphal teaches architectural history at Notre Dame. In 2001, he published a book called Why the Orders Matter. In it, he makes an observation that he can't explain. Quote, "The uniformity of neoclassical government architecture from 1850 to 1920 remains academically problematic. The speed of dissemination and precision of replication exceeds known communication and construction capabilities of the period." He's saying it spread too fast, was too identical for the technology of that era. Unless it wasn't spreading, unless it was being revealed, structures that already existed, being renovated, repurposed, claimed by new governments as their own construction. Tartarian buildings, being rebranded as modern achievements. Let me describe the system as I now understand it. The complete Tartarian atmospheric energy infrastructure. Component 1. The collector. The metal domes and spires weren't decorative. They were antennas, specifically designed to maximize surface area contact with the atmospheric electrical field. Dr. Paulo Correa, a Canadian physicist who studied atmospheric energy in the 1990s, demonstrated that specific dome geometries can increase electron capture from the ionosphere by factors of 10 or more. The Tartarians knew this 300 years earlier. Component 2. Storage. I've visited 15 pre-1900 buildings in 6 cities. Every single one has basements far deeper than structurally necessary, 20 to 30 feet underground. I brought a civil engineer with me to the old courthouse in St. Louis. He looked at the basement and said, "These rooms are sized like they were designed to house massive equipment. But there's nothing here, just empty space with copper-lined walls. Copper-lined walls in deep basements. That's a Faraday cage, a capacitor for storing electrical charge." Michael Faraday demonstrated the principle in 1836. Tartarian buildings were using it 50 years before Edison. Component 3. Distribution. The ornate metal grills, the decorative iron railings, the bronze fixtures covering every surface. I tested electrical continuity on the decorative ironwork at the Missouri State Capitol. Every piece connects, from the dome down through the railings, through the metal window frames, all the way to the basement. It's not decoration, it's a conductive network. Component 4. Grounding. The foundations go impossibly deep. Archaeologists excavating near old government buildings have found foundation stones 60 feet down, far beyond what's needed for structural support. And those foundation stones are made of magnetite-rich iron ore, natural conductors, connecting the entire system to the Earth's magnetic field. You have a collector, storage, distribution, grounding. That's a complete electrical system, functional, self-powered, and it's built into every major structure constructed before 1920. The buildings weren't just buildings, they were power stations. I found something in the congressional record from 1935 that changes everything. During debates over the Rural Electrification Act, Senator George Norris from Nebraska said something extraordinary. Let me read it exactly as recorded. There are thousands of structures in this country, built before the turn of the century, that demonstrate self-sustaining electrical capability. The electrification program being proposed ignores these structures because they do not contribute to the economic model of metered distribution. He admitted it. In official government record, old buildings had self-sustaining electrical capability, and the response was to ignore them, because they didn't make money. Think about what that means. In 1935 they knew, the government knew, that pre-1900 architecture could generate its own power, and they chose to bury that fact because the electrical industry was worth $400 billion. You don't kill the fifth largest industry in America to give people free energy. So instead, they killed the buildings. Between 1920 and 1960, more than 80% of pre-1900 structures in major American cities were demolished. Not because they were falling apart, because of urban renewal, progress, modernization. The original Penn Station in New York opened 1910. Massive steel and glass structure with domes 150 feet high. Demolished in 1963. Official reason, modernization. But the structural engineer who evaluated the building before demolition was a man named Charles Luckman. He published his memoirs in 1988, and in them he wrote something that haunts me. The structure was humming with static electricity. All measuring instruments showed abnormal field readings. We recommended additional study. Instead, we received demolition orders within 30 days. Humming with electricity from a building built in 1910, and instead of studying it, they destroyed it. Chicago World's Fair buildings demolished in 1894. San Francisco's original City Hall supposedly destroyed in the 1906 earthquake, except photographs show the structure intact. Original Penn Station, New York demolished 1963. Pittsburgh's Penn Station demolished 1952. Detroit's Michigan Central Station abandoned in 1988 and left to rot. Preservation historian Roberta Brandes Gratz wrote a book in 2011 called The Battle for Gotham. In it, she asks a question no one answers. The speed and completeness of Beaux-Arts demolition was architecturally irrational. These structures had superior quality to any replacement. The motivation remains obscure. The motivation isn't obscure, it's obvious. They were destroying evidence. I hired an independent electrical engineer, Dr. Michael Chen. I wanted to test buildings that still survive, to prove this wasn't just theory. We went to the Texas State Capitol, brought field meters, current detectors, spectrometers. At the dome, we measured 2,400 volts per meter. In the basement, we detected continuous current flow of 0.3 amperes running through the copper walls to ground. Dr. Chen looked at me and said, "This building is generating measurable electricity. The dome is collecting. The basement is storing. This works." We tested the old courthouse in St. Louis, measured a potential difference of 180 volts between the dome and basement. For context, a car battery is 12 volts. This building was functioning as a 180-volt battery, just from geometry and materials. The technology still works. The buildings that weren't demolished are still harvesting atmospheric energy. We've just forgotten how to tap into it. And here's what makes me furious. Modern technology is rediscovering these principles and calling them innovations. Hyundai patented an atmospheric electricity capture system for electric vehicles in 2020. MIT developed droplet generators that harvest energy from atmospheric moisture in 2019. Tel Aviv University created an atmospheric energy harvester in 2020. Dr. Fernando Gallenberg, a Brazilian chemist, published in the journal Science in 2010, quote, "Earth's atmosphere contains enormous amounts of electricity that can be captured. Principles for this have been understood for over a century, but were not commercially implemented. Over a century. He's admitting the knowledge existed, but wasn't used. They're patenting Tartarian technology and calling it new, because the original patents expired, because the people who remembered are dead, because they successfully erased the evidence. Almost. The Tartarian Empire didn't fall from weakness. It fell because its strength threatened everything the modern power structure is built on. Control. You can't control people who don't need you, can't tax them, can't charge them, can't make them dependent. And an empire running on free atmospheric energy creates free people. So they burned it down in 1812 and the decades after. Demolished the power stations they called buildings, destroyed the technical libraries, rewrote the architecture books, and sold us back metered electricity as progress. But they couldn't destroy everything. Buildings still stand, domes still collect, basements still store, and every pre-1920 structure that survives is a silent witness to an empire that had solved what we're told is impossible. Free energy isn't a dream, it's a memory, encoded in copper domes and iron spires, in basement capacitors and foundation grounds. In the architecture they tried to erase but couldn't completely kill. I've shown you the documents, the patents, the measurements, the congressional admissions, the engineering reports, the demolition records, the modern research rediscovering old principles. This isn't speculation. This is documented, measurable, provable. Before electricity as we know it, there was something better. The Tartarian atmospheric energy system, global, free, self-sustaining, and powerful enough that destroying it required burning down an empire. The buildings remember, even if we were made to forget. They stand there, domes reaching into charged skies, foundations planted in magnetic earth, still collecting, still storing, still waiting for someone to remember how to flip the switch. The empire fell, but the technology didn't die. It's sleeping. In every old capital, every historic cathedral, every pre-1900 structure with a dome and spire, waiting for us to remember what we lost, what was taken, what they've been hiding for 100 years in the most obvious place possible, right above our heads, in the sky we breathe, in the buildings we walk past, in the atmosphere that still holds unlimited power, free, abundant, accessible, the way it was before they made us forget, before they made us pay, before they convinced us that controlling energy meant controlling people. Tartaria knew different, and that knowledge cost them everything. But the evidence survived, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The domes, the spires, the copper, the basements, the measurements, the patents, the admissions, it's all still there, waiting, testifying to an empire that powered itself from the sky, and the system that killed it because free people are harder to rule than desperate ones. Before electricity, there was something better, and they've spent a century making sure you never found out.